But I guess what I've been thinking about in the online classroom is just the importance of relationship building and just building that trust, because I think that has manifest in the classroom online. Um, but just the level and different types of feedback that I'm giving to students, it's a different level of intensity, but I think that screencasting was something that I enjoyed as well. Just recording it anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. They have it, they can refer to it. Welcome everybody to this second episode of Coffee with Kim-Seda.
Thanks. Thank you.
And today we have joining us Ari Karpel, upper school English teacher, and Marc Rudajev, upper school and middle school math teacher. And today the topic we're going to explore, well, with all of these episodes, it's really a chance for you all, for the Milken community, to get to know a few folks in the community a little bit better and to talk about how they got into their career or teaching. But the focus today, why I chose Marc and Ari, is their career change moves before they came to Milken. But before we get there, just want to learn a little bit more about each of you. Ari, can I start with you? Can you tell me where you were born and raised and when you landed here in Los Angeles?
Well, I was born and raised in beautiful East Brunswick, New Jersey. I say beautiful ironically. And it's exit 9 on the New Jersey Turnpike, if you were
I was going to ask what exit, yeah.
I spent my childhood wanting to get out of there desperately. But in retrospect, it was actually a lovely place to grow up. It was a really solid public school education in a upper middle class community that was maybe 30% Jewish, but felt overwhelmingly Jewish. They're not religious by any means. And I went to NYU Film School to start. I was like desperate to go to New York to become a filmmaker, and I hated it. I hated New York, I hated NYU. It was my dream school that was sort of a disaster, and I had a bit of a meltdown, and I ended up moving to Madison, Wisconsin, where a friend of mine was in school, and I was using it as a base to kind of find another school, and I ended up falling in love with Madison, transferring into University of Wisconsin, studying history and doing peer health education work, and I got really involved in the Jewish community there. And from there went back to New York and worked in journalism at Entertainment Weekly magazine, followed by TV Guide, both for many years. And then back to Entertainment Weekly, which eventually moved me to California in 2007. I had been an editor at the magazine and wanted to become a writer and wanted to leave New York. So they moved me here in 2007. They laid me off in 2008, but I'd already met my husband and decided I wanted to stay. So I stayed, and I was a freelance journalist for a number of years until I became a teacher.
Okay, great. I'll get back to the career part in a moment. It sounds like your upbringing in your hometown was kind of similar to mine. Not New Jersey, but in Arizona. Perfectly fine growing up in Phoenix, good school system, enjoyed it. But, you know, my one criterion for college was to get out of Arizona. And I moved far away to New York City. But it sounded a little bit similar in that extent. Marc, can you tell me, born and raised, and maybe a little bit of your movements, because I know you also spent a significant amount of your time in France as well.
Yeah, I've got a passport and it's been well used. Mine is actually quite different. You know, that question of where are you from? For me, it's always been a difficult one to answer. I was actually born in New York. My parents were immigrants from, at the time was Czechoslovakia. Now it's the Czech Republic. They were both born in Prague, and they moved to New York about 3 months before I was born. So I was actually born there, but then they moved down to Florida when I was about 3. And I spent the next few years there. Then they got divorced. And so that forced my mom, my sister, and myself to move to Paris. Because before coming to the US, they had spent about 6-7 years in Paris. Between Prague and New York, they had made a pit stop there. So I actually did all of my middle and high school in Paris and finished that when I was 18, and then came back to the States for college. So I went to school in DC at Georgetown. And after that, I went to New York, back to New York, Manhattan, worked on Wall Street for JP Morgan. And similar to Ari, I didn't really like it, but it's not so much I didn't like New York. It was more, I just didn't like my job. 2 years grunt work at a big investment bank. So I decided to get out of there, and I applied to business schools. And that was the first time I almost moved to LA because I applied to UCLA, but ended up choosing University of Chicago because I heard the weather in Chicago was better than LA. So I went to school there for a couple of years. Then I got hired back by another investment bank called Morgan Stanley, which is a sister company of JP Morgan. But I went to London because my mom was still living in Paris at the time. And so I didn't want to go back to New York due to my trauma experience of 2 years there, and decided to go to London. And that was right before the Euro, 1999, 2000. So it was a great time to be there. And then they tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, we have an opportunity for you to go work in Hong Kong. And I had never been to Asia. So I said, well, I'll try it out. Worst case, I live in Hong Kong for a few years. I can go to Bali and to Thailand and have some nice holidays if it doesn't work out from a work perspective. But it actually turned out to be great. I spent 12 years in Asia, bouncing 4 years in Hong Kong, and then 8 years down in Singapore. And then after that, I decided to come back to the States. My kids were getting older. They had never lived here permanently. They always visited family, but didn't actually know it that well. Plus, I sort of had to do a Control-Alt-Delete reboot of my life, or what do we call it now? Command Control Power if we're using a MacBook tools. And so that's the time where I ended up leaving the whole financial services industry and becoming a teacher. And I'm sure we'll get into it. But yeah, those are my movements over the last 40 plus years.
Wow, thank you. And I know I've told you before in person, but when my wife and I went to Paris for the first time, you gave us some great recommendations for restaurants that I still remember to this day.
Right.
Chez Omar, I think Robert and Louise.
Yeah,
I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but those were just spectacular. So if you want recommendations for amazing places to eat when you're in Paris, Marc is your man. So back to Marc, I'll start with you and then kind of bounce to Ari on this. I'm curious for both of you. What interested me in interviewing both of you is I think you're both amazing teachers and you have great personalities, and I think the kids really connect with you well and clearly love both of you. But I was interested in this idea of career changers because I've been in education. I dabbled in public policy for a little bit in a degree, but I've really been in education for 20 plus years. What did you both mutually love about what you did in your jobs, your previous jobs, and what did you not like so much? And then can you talk to me a little bit more about your transition that led you to becoming a teacher? So Marc, let's start with you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, teaching was always in the back of my mind. Like both as an undergrad student, I worked at a tutoring center on campus. So it was free for the students. We got paid through the university. And I tutored kids in math and in French back then. And I dabbled also in substitute teaching when I was in Chicago. One of my undergraduate classmates, she had actually become a teacher at a private school in Chicago. And so she knew that I was a starving, poor graduate student. And she got me into her school occasionally to substitute teach when they had some needs. So it was always something that was like a plan B. But I had fallen in love with finance as a kid. I had watched the movie Wall Street, Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas, Bud Fox with Charlie Sheen. And it was something that really interested me from a macro perspective because all the markets are linked. It was a game in terms of you had to pick stocks and try to perform. And being a naturally competitive person, and I was never good enough to be a professional athlete, this was like the second best thing because you've got a number by your name. I mean, you make money or you don't make money, and it's pretty black and white transparent. So I like that aspect of problem solving with a very clear result that you can ascribe to, I mean, a lot of luck, to be honest, but also skill. So that's what attracted me to finance first. But teaching was always back there somewhere in the back of my mind.
Okay. How about you, Ari?
Well, I hear so many things in there that I relate to, because I think teaching was really in the back of my mind all the time as well. And similarly, I guess when I was in college, I was a peer health educator. So I was doing safer sex workshops in French because I did that in my French class. I decided to use the French classes and do safer sex workshops to combine my peer health education and my French work. I don't know why. It was just a weird thing that I did. But and funny enough, when I was in high school, I had a few friends who loved the movie Wall Street and wanted to watch it all the time.
Sure.
And they were completely inspired by Gordon Gekko to go into finance. I sort of went the opposite way. I mean, I watched that and I thought it was repellent, actually. But I loved my friends who were into it, and I thought it was funny that they were, and I really had completely different perspective on the world, and I wanted to go in the direction of creating art. And I thought Oliver Stone's filmmaking was really interesting. But yeah, I think teaching was kind of always in the back of my mind, and frankly, I had considered it, although I considered everything as a career possibility, because I was that kind of person who was interested in lots of things. I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a rabbi, I'm going to be a social worker. It kept changing every 5 minutes when I was in college, and my father at one point made clear that teaching was not an option because I was a man and had to make money, which gets into a whole other, subject. But but I think, I guess, to get back to your question, which I guess was about sort of what did I love, what did I hate? Is that right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
I think as a journalist, the thing that I loved the most was interviewing people, talking to people about their lives, because I'm just interested in people. And as an editor, I didn't do that with interviewing people, but I did it with my writers. So I was, boss to a dozen young writers at Entertainment Weekly, and I would help them do their job. I would coach them through their process and help them shape their stories. And that was the most exciting part of my job. And then when I transitioned from being an editor to being a writer, and I was interviewing people all the time, but my work of actually writing stories was very isolated. And it's kind of the thing that killed me as a journalist ultimately, was I was spending too much time alone, and I didn't want to do that anymore. And the collaborative feeling that I got as an editor was sort of what came to the fore for me as a teacher. I wanted to work with people again. So I wanted to teach kids, and I wanted to work with other adults on doing that.
And actually, Ari, I'd like to hear your thought, because you mentioned in 2008 you got laid off, and that actually happened to me as well. If you do a Google search under my name, I got interviewed by The Economist and a couple other publications as being an expat in Singapore. And after 2008, the financial services industry had changed a lot due to regulations, and obviously the publishing industry has gone through a massive transformation for 15 years or so with the advent of the internet. But what happened after 2008, 2009, so many times we would sit around at lunch or at dinner or at a bar, and we'd be with our friends and colleagues and always saying, oh, if you weren't in finance, what else would you do? If you weren't in finance, what would you do? And when it came around to my turn to talk, I would always say teaching. It was always, oh yeah, teaching. But the problem with finance is the allure of you can make a lot of money. And obviously as a teacher, you don't make a lot of money. So you sort of postpone, in my case, teaching, and in my other friends, they want to be architects or whatever other medical fields they might want to pursue. And people push it off because it's like, well, I don't want to go back to school. I don't want to give up this money, this lifestyle. And so for me, it took 4 years, 2012, 2013, to finally hit that Control-Alt-Delete button. But I wonder if, Ari, you had the same thing when the industry was shaking up, if you'd talk to your friends and colleagues and have the same idea?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, 2008 was such a huge and important time of transition for me and many of my friends and colleagues. I would say that the majority of my friends who were in media for so long are no longer in it, or at least not in the same capacity. Many of them have become PR people, or they're doing some form of teaching maybe, or they've gotten into politics, or found some like different way in marketing. And so it was always clear to me that it was a good time to get out of journalism. It was changing in a way that wasn't sustainable anymore. But I also recognized the teaching was not going to be a big money thing. So for a while, I was writing freelance, and I started teaching part-time as a way to kind of explore it and kind of cobble together a career that seemed to have many different things. So I could write, and then I can go and teach a class at UCLA Extension, and then I could do something else. But I kept getting drawn more to teaching, and I started volunteering with 826LA, which is Dave Eggers' nonprofit, which is amazing. I was doing writing projects with kids in public schools in South LA and East LA. And that's what really like drew me deep into teaching.
I want to build off that. Well, first side note, Zaytoon was one of my favorite books that I read by Dave Eggers. But I'm curious, going to take a slight turn here, because both of you were impacted by the recession 2008. Fortunately, I was not, but my wife was, so I felt it a little bit. But curious, thinking about this idea of disappointment and things not happening well in our careers. And I'm wondering if there's like a lesson or word of advice, if there are some students who might listen to this, some graduating seniors, or because I moved out to LA, I was in Boston, I was teaching, I kind of was ready for administration. So I actually moved out here to be a middle school principal. And I was at a school here in Culver City for 2 years. You know, it was a big jump. I was kind of in over my head. Eventually I was let go from that job by the head of school. And I still even say let go instead of fired. I was fired. And it was the first big disappointment I had. When was it? That was 2009, I believe. And, you know, I bounced back and I found a job at Milken, but it was just, when I could remove the anger and the disappointment, I could see there were some things that I could have done better relationally with my boss to navigate kind of the waters of that school a little bit better. Sometimes I tended to be a little bit too independent and introspective in my problem solving. I needed to work on kind of externalizing and collaborating a little bit more, as opposed to taking on too much. So it was, when I was removed, I could learn that lesson. And also, I think sometimes it just wasn't a good fit in terms of kind of the school's vision and my own beliefs. I think ultimately, I don't think I would have been there much longer anyway. So I'm wondering if from either that disappointment of the Great Recession, or was there another work disappointment where you kind of learned a lesson and what you might communicate to students who might be experiencing a little bit of disappointment right now?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly resonates with me. I think I hadn't really thought of it quite in that way, but I think in a certain way, disappointment has been a sort of earmark of my career in a certain way, and has motivated me. You know, whether it was the disappointment of going to my dream school and hating it, to, you know, recognizing that even though I loved my career as a journalist, it never felt like it was feeding my soul in the way that I was craving. And of course, there was huge disappointment at being laid off at the time that I was. But I think I've had there even more recently. I mean, I started out teaching in East LA at a charter school in Lincoln Heights, and it was fascinating and I learned a ton. But ultimately, I decided it wasn't right for me long term. It wasn't sustainable, and there was a disappointment in realizing that hey, I wasn't that guy that I thought I was going to be. I thought I was going to go into a high needs school and really be able to support kids who desperately need good teachers. And I had to recognize, you know what, maybe that's not the best thing for me. And maybe I'm not the best person for this. And I have to find a, a, a kind of job and a situation that's going to be right for me and for the people I'm working with. And ultimately it took, this is now my third school, it took until I got to Milken to recognize like, oh wow, this I think feels like the right school. I feel a part of this community very quickly. And but I think what happens is along the way, we always think that we want to do a certain thing and we imagine it a certain way. And then the reality is always going to be different. There's always some detail to it that we don't anticipate that will be disappointing in some way. And I think growing up and maturing is a lot about realizing that and how you handle it and how you make adjustments and recognize like, hey, I'm not a failure because I chose this thing that now has this quality that I don't like, or I have to find a different version of this. It's a sort of a lifelong process, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, obviously we've got all the, to summarize what both of you said, we've got all the cliches of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or you learn more from failures than from successes. I'm watching The Last Dance at the moment, the Michael Jordan documentary, and over and over and over again, it's he has his best moments after having bad moments. That really motivates him. So I totally agree with that. The only thing I would add would be relationships, building relationships or repairing relationships that might have been broken. At the end of the day is really going to help you over the medium to long term. That will help you both professionally, within the career that you have. If you're changing careers, it's going to help you obviously on the personal side with your family, with your spouses, with your friends, with anyone you interact with. So I think as long as you nurture those relationships and really build those, that's going to be ultimately what will help you rebound faster and stronger when you do have those disappointments. That would be the one other thing I would add compared to what the two of you have already said.
Right.
Yeah, thanks for that. I want to talk about life at Milken a little bit, and you both transitioning from your previous careers, the editing room and the trading floor, to the classroom. What has, from your previous career, what have you brought into the classroom to kind of to your pedagogy, to your approach? And kind of related to that, coming from different organizations or careers, you're working in a school, what's kind of odd about working in a school as an institution? Are you like, really? We would have done it this way at UW or at JP Morgan.
I'd say
either, go ahead.
I mean, if I can jump in first, I'd say for me, obviously in the finance world, sort of what I explained at the beginning, where it's all about the bottom line, making money. And obviously companies that make a lot of money aren't afraid to spend a lot of money because obviously they're dealing in millions or billions of dollars. But at the end of the day, it's a cost versus benefit analysis that takes place, or risk versus reward that takes place when you're looking at an investment. And so I always we have a limited amount of time. We have a lot of things we need to accomplish. I think schools, rightly so, take this rose-tinted glasses type of view. We want to help our students succeed and all these things. But at the end of the day, we don't have unlimited resources. We don't have money that just flows from everywhere. And we're fortunate being a relatively, we've got some money, but public schools suffer even more given cuts in budgets and everything, and the low income circles that some of their students come from. So they have other challenges. So we're a bit fortunate compared to some, but still we obviously have many constraints. And so I think it's all about doing that analysis. And I feel that sometimes that at Milken. For me, it's the only school I've ever worked in, so I can't say necessarily for others, but speaking to my friends who work at other schools, I feel the same. I think sometimes we look at all the pluses of any project or anything that we want to take on or any new curriculum that we want to add. And I don't feel that sometimes we look at the negatives or the risks or the costs associated with it. And so sometimes I think if we did a better job of that, we might make different decisions as to some programming that we do or don't offer. So that would be the one thing that I try to do in my own personal, when I'm designing a class or designing something that I want the students to work on. And I'd like for the school to maybe incorporate that a bit more in terms of our framework here.
Okay. Ari, how about you?
Gosh, I think that I certainly, I benefited tremendously from my time as a journalist because it gave me all these skills in terms of interacting with people and learning to listen and also learning to examine structures. So a lot of what I wrote about was the entertainment industry. And so I would examine it on different levels, from interviewing writers and directors up to producers and executives, and coming to understand the system, whether it's the movie studio system or the television industry. And that sort of micro to macro perspective was essential to being able to do my job. And I find that helps me when I enter a school to try to feel out what the structure is and how things work and understand it in a way that I find useful to understanding my surroundings and figuring out how to navigate it. And I think is important for letting teachers be a part of that. Like, I'm part of Shulkin's new faculty advisory committee, and that is, I find really useful to be able to get some perspective from her at times, or to be able to give input. And I love seeing the school growing to incorporate more of that sort of, so it's not as bifurcated between like administration and teachers who only understand their role and not necessarily understanding the bigger picture, because they're inextricable from one another. So I'm just always fascinated by that. I can't sit and just like, oh, this is what I do, and not pay attention to what else is happening. I want to always be up.
When we come out of this pandemic and are back in face-to-face classrooms, I'm wondering if there's anything that you have learned about your teaching now that we've been distance teaching sometimes. And we started, I would say, in the first week or so, crisis teaching is a quick shift, but I know our teachers have done a great job doing that shift. I'm wondering if there's something you might change about the way you teach in person based on what you've learned the last, we've been at home for 60 days. Is there something you might change when you're back face to face? Or something you've learned about yourself as a teacher teaching online?
I think I've experimented with some things, and some is obviously forced upon us given that we're not face to face, and others are, hey, why not? Now's a good time to try things out and see what sticks. And the one thing that I think's worked pretty well with a group of students is doing the flipped classroom idea. Mm-hmm. So quite fortunately for both math and French, there's a strict curriculum of this is what you need to achieve in algebra, or this is what you need to achieve in a certain level of French. And there's thousands of videos online that exist for whatever curriculum that you're looking for. And so because we got thrown in, I haven't created my own. I'm using other people's creations, but I'm throwing them out there, including them as attachments to assignments or on the topics page of my Milken or via email. And the students can look at those ahead of time before the actual lesson. And those students that feel comfortable with what was said in those videos can go ahead and start the practice homework or home fun, as I call it. And those students where the video didn't click, or they didn't have time or whatever, I can also obviously give a traditional lesson. And so I think I might spend the summer creating my own content, and that way I'll have that as a resource to add to the traditional teaching next year. That would be the one big takeaway for me.
Home fun, wow.
Yeah, because it's so much fun.
Sounds it. I want to get in on that. So in my class,
Yeah, you have plenty of time for home fun right now.
too much time. So one of the things that I've noticed in teaching online is, I've been doing a lot of like, in my English classes, because I also teach journalism, but in my English classes, I will often give the kids a question about, right now we're reading Death of a Salesman in the 9th grade. So a particular question kind of analyzing a particular aspect of the play. And they're warm up in class, they answer that individually online and submit it to me before we have a discussion. So I know that everyone is prepared and conversant and has had an opportunity to develop their idea. And I also have all their answers so that I can maybe choose people who speak according to like, oh, who has a contrary opinion here, and I can kind of efficiently move through the discussion in a way that I can't when it's just like, hey, who has something to say now? And so that's sort of that idea of moving into the physical classroom, but having the students submit an answer on the spot online, and I can view that and then turn it into a group discussion is just a slightly different way than I have done it in the physical classroom before. So that's one example. I also like the sort of giving feedback on video that I've started doing on writing, instead of just giving them typed out feedback. I think that might hit them in a different way. And that's nice. It's like things that I knew about, but just hadn't experimented with.
Wait, so Ari, you record a video of yourself and you mail it to them, or how does that work?
So I'll do like a screencastify video of myself scrolling through their document and giving them particular feedback and like highlighting things as I'm talking.
Oh, this is student by student. So if you have time,
student I could do it like 5 minutes per kid,
right,
or something like that at the most, and then they have that to refer to whenever they want to. We'll see.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I was going to say I did that with when they finished reading To Kill a Mockingbird for their essays, and I went up and I made my comments in their Google Doc, but it was more some minimal marking. But then as I pointed or highlighted the comment, I was able to talk through what I was talking about, and I felt like it was a thorough process, and it was kind of. But I guess what I've been thinking about in the online classroom is just the importance of relationship building and just building that trust, because I think that has manifested in the classroom online. But just the level and different types of feedback that I'm giving to students, it's a different level of intensity, but I think that screencasting was something that I enjoyed as well. Just recording it anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, they have it, they can refer to it. It kind of freed me up as well to just talk through some things, and then they can meet me at Lishma if they want to. So I'm definitely looking forward to taking a few things that I've been learning to sharpen what I do in the classroom. Just going to ask one last question, then we're going to wrap up here. Tell us one thing we wouldn't know about you upon first acquaintance. Just some random fact about their teachers. And I'm just going to go ahead and start because I was looking at my screen, my virtual background. This is a College Walk, Columbia University, where I went to undergrad. Remember, I referenced I wanted to get as far away from Phoenix, Arizona as I could. New York City seemed like a good bet. And in the background is Butler Library, where I worked my work-study job in the college stacks in the library for my first 2 years. And it was a great job, but definitely kept me busy. And sometimes out of trouble in New York City. I couldn't get into too much trouble because it was so dang expensive. So it was either studying, working, I don't know, boiling some pasta, eating a peanut butter and jelly,
Ramen.
but ramen. I mean, the first month I tried to go to some concerts, but then it was like, I don't have money or time. But yeah,
Really
one of my jobs was working in a library, filing old books.
Wow. What's a library? Can you? No.
Right.
Yeah.
There was that really good pizza place up by Columbia that I used to go up to when I was at NYU.
Cornet with the really big slices that you have to fold over.
Oh.
I mean, they're like as big as your face. It was delicious.
Yeah, that name is not familiar, strangely. Gosh.
Yeah. All right. Random fact.
Oh, I am not a neat person. I think I give off the impression that I am fastidious because I am fastidious in certain ways as a person, but I am kind of messy. And I had to change that when I got married, or when my husband and I moved in together before we got married, because he is a very neat person and required me to figure out how to put things in places. And so I have had to do that, and I'm a better person for it.
Opposites attract, right?
Indeed. But opposites also sometimes have to adjust.
This is true.
especially when safer at home.
Oh my God.
We're very tight. Mark, how about you?
I guess for me, the thing would be, I've got these Eastern European roots, and there's a lot of romantic composers and stuff from a classical music perspective. So I've got that torment inside of me. And as a result, one of my favorite genres, or maybe my favorite genre of movie, are romantic comedies. You probably wouldn't know that by hanging around me or listening to me talk, but movies like When Harry Met Sally, or Love Actually, or going back a bit further like Annie Hall and things like that, I just love them. And I cry, and yeah, that's probably not something you would guess necessarily hanging out with me.
That's awesome.
Very nice. Well, recently I watched the half of it on Netflix. It's kind of a teen romance comedy. It was really good. And I found myself at
Netflix has that algorithm down. I mean, they're making teen comedies like they're going out of style because I guess they realize people just love them.
But that's the one that's like a lesbian twist on Cyrano, right?
Yeah, and I got teary-eyed at the end. It was but whenever there's like a father-daughter, father-son, story, they have me from the beginning. I'm definitely going to cry. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you both. It was good to see you. Thank you for coming to Coffee with Kim-Seda episode 2. And I'll see you virtually soon, hopefully in person, not too far in the distant future.
You're
welcome. All right, thank you both.
It was fun.
All right, bye.